Hey, thank you so much for joining us at our Crosspoint Church podcast. Now, if you're new to our podcast or maybe new to our church in general, we're just a bunch of messed up people who don't have it all together, running after a heavenly leader who loves us and meets us right where we are. We hope this message encourages you, builds your faith, and strengthens your confidence as you continue down this journey of what it means to know and follow Jesus. Enjoy this message.
Come on, is Dwight Schrute not everybody's favorite complicated coworker, right? I don't know, or at least somebody on that show. Hey, welcome again to Crosspoint. My name is Abbie, and I'm so excited to be with you as we are continuing on for week 3 of this series, Thank God It's Monday, the phrase that none of us have ever found ourselves saying. And as Kurt mentioned, we're looking today at how do we work with complicated people, and not just how do we work, but how do we live, how do we interact, how do we deal with their reality. And I think this is going to be a fun one. It's been a fun day here already. Make some noise if you were a part of any of the March Madness festivities out in the Commons today. We had a great time, yeah. And so excited that you're joining us, whether you are here in the venue or joining us online this weekend from wherever life finds you. Again, let's make some noise for those our online audience, friends from wherever you are. As we think about this topic, I started thinking about this time that several years ago, I went to this church conference with a bunch of leaders from different places, because that's the industry that I'm in. And there was this one night where I went to dinner with a group of people that were all there for that conference and ended up seated next to this guy who I'd kind of known who he was. I'd actually kind of admired his church from afar for a while. And, we got to talking through dinner, and I don't remember a lot of the conversation, but I do remember having this thought at the end of dinner, like, man, I don't think I could ever work for him. He seems like maybe it could be a little bit complicated. And, maybe I shouldn't tell you that story because there's a chance that some of you may actually recognize his name. It's Kurt Walters. And, looking back, this is hilarious to me now because my impression that day was so off. I love working with Kurt and with the Crosspoint team, and I'm so glad that I didn't let whatever was going on in that interaction, probably my own stuff that day, keep me from being open to the conversation when a job opened here a few years later. But, this happens sometimes. We come across people in the workplace or wherever we are, and sometimes we get this initial read that they are complicated, but we're actually missing some of the story. Maybe they're having an off day or we're having an off day. But let's be honest, there's other times when we encounter complicated people and our read is spot on. And still, we have to figure out a way to work with them, to live with them, to deal with them. And so that's what we're talking about today. How do we deal with these people who get under our skin, who we may not understand, who perhaps make our lives a little more complicated? And we're going to be drawing quite a bit from a book that actually hasn't quite released yet. It's this book coming out on April 15th by Ryan Leake that is called How to Work with Complicated People, Strategies for Effective Collaboration with Nearly Anyone. And I love this, that the heart behind this project is really, it's based out of values that are informed by Ryan's faith, but he's written it in a way that is accessible to anyone, with language that you can easily share with any coworker or anybody that you know. And, the team that worked on this book, a lot of it's based in this national research study that they did across working America, where they were trying to figure out how people are navigating difficult circumstances in their workplace. And one of the questions that they asked these people that they surveyed was, what's your definition of complicated? Because the truth is, complicated is often in the eye of the beholder. There are people in my life that I might deem complicated that you might think are pretty simple, and vice versa. A lot of it has to do with how we're wired. And so when they ask people this question, what's your definition of complicated? Here's some of the answers that they got. Somebody said, guy named Nate. Another one, this lady I work with named Leslie. I'm not sure these people really understand the word definition, but it's clear that they are going through it. Somebody else said cantankerous, a numbskull, This one might be my favorite. Just, they are really dumb. That's their definition. I'm not sure any of these give us a really great definition as a jumping off point, but they do reflect something that I think we all know. The complicated people are everywhere. We all have someone that we work with, that we live with, interact with, that's like a Leslie or a Nate. And I just want to say for the record, if you're in the room, if you're watching online and your name is Leslie or Nate, I don't have anything against you, but somebody does. So just so you know. You know, when we think about how we deal with complicated people, here is the majority of people's go-to strategy: simply to steer away from them. Avoid as much as possible, right? Often we find ourselves in these places where we think, you know what, if I just quit this job, if I just get away from those people, then things will get better. But the problem with that is then we get to the next job and we look around and we realize there's more complicated people there too. The truth is you cannot get away from complicated people. You have to learn how to work with them, perhaps even how to love them. And of course, this is not just true in the workplace. There's complicated people everywhere you go. In the school pickup line, at the grocery store, at your kids' sports games. My word, at your kids' sports games, right? Dating is complicated, whether you're dating online, offline, all of it. Last summer, I had an instance where I got to kind of see this up close. My friend brought this guy that she had met on a dating app to come and hang out with a group of us at my neighborhood pool. And everything was going great at first, and then at one point in the afternoon, I was playing with my kids in the pool, and I started to hear a pretty tense conversation happening across the way. And I looked up and realized that it was my friend's date in the face of my neighbor who I had never met, who I did not know at the time, but quickly found out was my HOA president. And the way that I found this out about him is he started yelling at this guy who I didn't know but had technically invited to the pool, "I'm the HOA president." Talk about layers of complicated. And so I did what any reasonable person would do. The next morning, I listed my house on the market. Just kidding. We worked it through. It's all good, but it was complicated. Parenting is complicated. I work part-time and often from home, and so my cutest and most complicated coworker is without a doubt my 2-year-old. And if you want to get an idea of just what I mean by this, here's a very real glimpse into what is honestly my daily life. Millie's fine, honey. You owe me. This is a video that I sent my husband. He asked me to take the dog to the vet, which is normally something that is on his plate, hence the "you owe me" at the end of the video, if you couldn't catch what I was saying. Which reminds me, marriage, certified complicated, right? Divorce is complicated. Half of every one of us in this room, half of every one of us watching online knows just how much. See, sometimes we need to be reminded that every single person shows up to their job, shows up to their home, shows up to church, to the gym, to the classroom with a lot of complicated. And it's so easy to find ourselves judging someone's outside, having no idea what's going on their inside. And so my hope today is that we would be able to learn through some biblical strategies how we can move slow enough to become people who actually move toward people that we might rather ignore. Because isn't that exactly what we would want someone else to do for us? The first thing we need to do when we're working with complicated people is we have to realize our own complications. When you heard the title of that book a few minutes ago, you probably started to think about some of the complicated people in your life. Maybe you even thought, like, I need that book. I'm about to pre-order it. But you know what I bet not a single one of you thought? Somebody needs that book for me. We don't think that, right? In Romans 3, Paul famously writes, "For every one of us has sinned. We all fall short of God's glorious standard." Don't you wish he would have just said, "they all"? That's easier, right? We can get this idea that everyone around us has the better end of the stick by getting to be in relationship with us. But the question that I think that we need to wrestle with is, could it be that on the other side of me, there's some complexity? What would it look like for us to be people who instinctively look in the mirror before we point a finger? Let me go first. Hi, I'm Abbie Craig, and I am complicated. Recently, my husband and I were getting ready to go on a trip, and I was looking through his texts because I was trying to find some details about where we were staying, and I came across this text from his friend that said, quote, "I thought about sending this to Abbie too, but I don't think I've ever gotten a response from her." To which I know I'm chronically bad at keeping up with responses, but I thought, there's no way I'm that bad. That cannot be true. And then I looked down at my phone and I saw 220 missed texts and 408 missed calls. And I thought, yikes, I guess I can be complicated. I'm what you might call a time optimist, or what others might call perpetually running late. I always think that I can squeeze more into a day than I can, that I can get places faster than I really can. And some of you are like, that's not complicated at all. I relate to that. But others of you are more like my son, and you're like, that drives me insane. It's complicated. My memory is not what it used to be, which leads to times where I drop the ball on something that I forgot I committed to do, or I find myself asking someone a question and then realize later on I 100% have asked them that question before. Some of you are nodding your heads because you've been on the other side of this, and I am so sorry. I'm complicated. All right, I went first. I mean, I could keep going, but we don't need to spend all our time doing that. Now it's your turn. I'm kind of joking, but also kind of serious. That if you find yourself really consumed with the annoyance of trying to deal with a complicated person in your life, maybe this would be something that benefits you this week, to just sit down and take some inventory. Because every one of us has a pace. We have preferences. We have a personality that may not vibe well with someone else's. I know that there might be someone on your mind that gets on your last nerve, but is it possible that we are doing the same to someone else? In that study we mentioned a minute ago, they found that 78% of people reported working with complicated people. That the average American said that they had about 3 to 5 complicated people that they worked with on a regular basis. They also asked them in that same study, how complicated do you think you are? And they found that 74% of Americans think that we are less complicated than the average person. That math doesn't math, right? Here's what this means. We are all walking into our jobs thinking, I've got to work with all these complicated people. Thank God I'm not one of them, right? It seems that we all need to take a minute to be considerate of our own complications, to realize maybe I'm not always the easiest person to deal with. Maybe I think I'm inspiring when I could be intimidating. Maybe I think I'm empowering when I'm actually micromanaging. Maybe I think that I'm super clear when I actually might be a little vague. Just because I said it doesn't mean they heard it or understood it. In another letter, Paul writes this: since God chose you all to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Isn't that a fun list of words that all come so easily to us? Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. What would it look like for us to copy and paste this into the relationships with people in our lives that we would deem complicated. Think about this idea that Paul talks about here of make allowances. Remember allowances? I know we didn't all get these, but some of us back in the day, you got paid to take out the trash or do the dishes, to do the things that now you just do and you get no benefit from. But an allowance is a set amount. And on it, often we kind of associate it with, we do something good and we earn this. But that's not how Paul is using it here. Paul's saying, make an allowance for each other's faults. Have this set amount already set aside. He's saying, what would it look like if in your relationships you decided, I'm going to leave some allowance in my back pocket for your faults? You might say something that I don't love. You might infer something, have some body language, offend me. You might steal a sale, make me feel some type of way. But regardless of what you do, I'm going to leave an allowance for you. I'm going to give you a break before you need one. Have you ever had a situation in your life where someone was really under your skin? You just couldn't understand why they were acting the way that they were until you found out the backstory of what was really going on in their life? And all of a sudden, you had a totally different perspective on how they were being. You were like, oh, my bad. And you gave them a break. Here's the thing that I think we forget. You don't need to know someone's backstory in order to make an allowance for them. You can choose to give them a break anyways. You can decide, you know what, I'm just going to assume that there is more going on than I know. And I'm not going to wait. I'm going to give them the break, give them the allowance that I wish someone was giving to me. When we do this, it's not only to the benefit of the people who we're giving a break to, it's to our benefit too. My husband opened a new business a few weeks ago, which means that, honestly, the last few weeks in my house have been absolutely insane. I've found myself having to pick up a ton of extra responsibility at home, navigate a lot of extra stress on his end and my end, and in a time where I'm not exactly at my peak energy levels. And, we've been through some similar seasons before, and what has often happened in those times is it's led to a lot of conflict between us. But at the beginning of this year, when we were going through the 2025 goals series here at Crosspoint, I began to sense God showing me some things that really surprised me, kind of caught me off guard. And honestly, what I believe now was happening is that God was starting to prepare me to be ready to give my husband an allowance, to offer him some extra grace during this time. And I have to tell you, that pre-deciding to leave an allowance for him has made such a difference for me. Not that it's been perfect or that I've been gracious 100% of the time. I mean, you saw the video I sent him. Y'all know already that's not true. But truthfully, my resentment level has been so much lower. My capacity to see the bigger picture and to see us as a team has been so much higher than in similar seasons before. So let me ask you, do the people in your life have an allowance with you? Does your spouse, your kids, your boss, your friends? If you're a student, do you leave an allowance for your teachers? I know you don't love me for that one. How about your coworkers? Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. You may be thinking, I would if they deserved it, but I know that they don't. That's actually kind of the point. See, Christians are people who give away what we don't deserve to other people who don't deserve it. This is the whole idea of God's grace. We're not meant to be a group of people walking around acting like we're better than everyone else. Christians are meant to be people who say, you know what? I'm just going to treat everyone like somebody died for them. This is the heartbeat of who we are here at Crosspoint. To be a place where we all recognize we don't have it all together. And when we can start from that real reality, we can actually find a way to grow to new places. Now, if you're here, if you're watching online this week and you're just checking out Faith in Church, then good news for you. This is totally optional. You can decide if this sounds like a helpful practice to maybe put into play in your life to make an allowance for people around you, take it or leave it. But if you find yourself listening to this and you are a person who says, yeah, I'm following after Jesus, this is part of the deal. This is what it looks like. Now, you may have noticed so far that this doesn't really seem to be a teaching about how to deal with complicated people. You thought we were going to talk about all them, right? But all of a sudden, we're talking about you a lot. And, this is on purpose. Because if you learn how to deal with you, you'd be surprised how well you can deal with other people. Another thing that is important as we learn to deal with complicated people in our lives is to never let their behavior dictate yours. Be the one to set the temperature in that relationship, to decide, I'm not going to let your behavior determine mine. We see an example of what this looks like in the early church in this scene that Luke records in the book of Acts. It's this moment where the conflict between those who have decided to start following Jesus, who believe that he was who he says he was, and those who are like, I'm not buying it. This is a hoax and it's dangerous and we need to quash it. Between those two groups has reached this fever pitch. It's like conflict at my pool last summer level of tension. Actually, it's worse because we find out that in the midst of this, there's this guy named Stephen who's stoned to death. And then Luke tells us in Acts chapter 8, he said, there arose on that day a great persecution in the church in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. There's a big story being told in those last three words. Everybody's on the run, except the apostles. There's so much to be afraid of. Everyone is reacting out of fear except the apostles. What is it that made the difference for them? Well, they had spent the last 3 years following this guy who had told them again and again that he was actually going to die and come back to life. And then he did. They'd seen it with their own eyes. And so now as they look at this chaos around them, they're like, you know what? We've seen real power. We'll be all right. We're not going to let a government, we're not going to let a threat, we're not going to let where the herd is going dictate our actions. And their perspective allowed them to be a thermostat instead of a thermometer. You know, everywhere you go, your home, your workplace, every place that you're in has a climate. You're probably super aware of this, especially if the climate is not so great. And every day we get to decide, am I going to show up here and be a thermometer who reflects and matches the climate around me? Or will I be a thermostat who actually sets the climate in the room? Some of us walked in here today feeling like we are products of our environment, but I am here to tell you it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to let other people's behavior determine yours. It might be a toxic environment, but you don't have to be a toxic person. So don't let where you work determine how you work. Don't let where you live determine how you live. Now, in order to get there, you might need some more tools than you currently have in your pocket. So a couple of next steps that I would recommend to you if you are a person who's like, you know what, I really want to grow in my ability to stay true to who I am despite what's going on around me. One, if you've never read this book, Crucial Conversations, this is a great resource, both for individuals, but also for teams. I actually encountered it first as a part of a whole staff team that went through it together and processed it, and it gave us some really helpful tools to navigate some conflicts that we'd been getting stuck on over and over again. And so if you're a person who, in your job, you have the ability to kind of rally a team around a resource, this may be one that you want to check out if you're not familiar with it. Or if you are like, you know what, I really do want to grow in this, but I don't think I've got a whole book in me. Here are a couple of options for you. I found this podcast a couple of weeks ago called How to Handle Difficult People and Take Back Your Peace and Power. And I'm not saying it's like the best resource I've ever found, but I was really impressed by the way that they modeled how to disarm in conversations that could easily get elevated and out of hand. And so maybe you just want to take an hour and listen to this. If you missed any of our last series, Reactions Speak Louder Than Words, this is another resource that I cannot encourage you enough to go back and check out. I'm telling you, I can't remember a series that I've had so many conversations with people telling me about the ways that it is making a difference in their daily interactions. So many good tools in this and the secret of the over-under reaction. One more, we've got an opportunity coming up called Discover Your Strengths Workshop, where if you've never used Clifton Strengths Finders to discover how you are uniquely wired and what it might look like for you to leverage that, and also for you to recognize that there's a whole lot of strengths on the list that you don't have. And it may actually be worth the work of dealing with people around you who are wired differently to kind of fill in the gaps of those places. This is a great opportunity to come and be a part of this group session and then the coaching that will come after it. So many steps that we can take. Perhaps one of these will be one of them. One more thing I want to make sure that we mention that I think is so vitally important in working with complicated people is sometimes we have to stop and look for God's perspective on them. There's another story in the book of Acts about these two guys, Peter and Cornelius, who were really on the opposite ends of any spectrum you can think of. Cornelius is this Roman army officer, and he's a good man. He's trying to make a difference in his community, but he's not Jewish. And so for Peter, this is kind of a deal breaker. And Luke tells us about this one afternoon where Cornelius is spending some time praying, and he has this vision. And God tells him to invite this man who he does not yet know yet, named Peter, over to his house. And then meanwhile, somewhere else, Peter is praying and wishing that he had a snack, which I totally understand these days. And as he's doing this, he has this really strange vision, where there's this sheet that has all of these different animals on them. And this voice from heaven saying, Peter, eat these things. And Peter's response is like, whoa, no, I can't do that. I've never eaten anything that God says is unclean. See, for all of history, as Peter knew it, there were these Jewish purity laws that had been a defining mark for him of who was in with God and who was out with God. And so to question these long-held beliefs was a big deal. And so God is patient with him. He repeats it a second time and a third time. And then Acts 10 tells us, while Peter was pondering this vision, while he's trying to wrap his head around it, God says to him, there are some men that are coming to look for you. Go with them without hesitation, for I have sent them. And again, we have to keep in mind that up until this point, for people like these guys and Cornelius to start following Jesus, they would have had some hoops to jump through. They would have also had to be willing to become Jewish, to adopt their laws and customs, and go through some seriously painful initiation rites. But all of a sudden, because of this encounter that Peter has had in this time of prayer, he's beginning to question, is that still right? Is it possible that maybe Jesus is opening the door wider than we thought? And we see eventually Peter does come to this radically different conclusion than where he started. He gets to Cornelius' house and he tells them, it's against our laws for a guy like me to be at a house like yours or to associate with you. But God has shown me that I need to leave that behind, that I should no longer see anyone that way. That God plays no favorites. It makes no difference who you are or where you're from. If you want God and are ready to do as he says, the door is open. Now, to us, this is pretty elementary stuff, right? We're like, well, yeah, that's what God is like. But at the time, this is a massive revelation. This was a huge leap forward in understanding what God's character was really about. And it's also a story that reminds us that a lot can change in the midst of prayer. As you think about a complicated person in your life, what could happen if you began to pray today about seeing them differently? Now, you don't need to tell them that you're doing this. I once had a guy, not at this church, but a different church that I worked at, who came up to me and he said, I'd like you to pray for me. I'm feeling really convicted because I've always been really annoyed by your voice and it's been hard for me to listen to you. To which I was like, you really just said that out loud to me. Okay, and now I have to pray for you. I'm not saying that we need to go to the complicated people in our lives this week and tell them that we're praying this over them, but to carve out some time this week, to spend some time just you and God and to say, God, would you help me to see my spouse the way that you see them? God, would you give me your perspective on my kids? God, as I go throughout my work week and interact with my boss and my coworkers, would you give me eyes to see them the way that you do? This can be such a powerful change. In fact, let's begin to pray that way even right now. God, we pray that as we think about the complicated people in our lives, the ones who have been coming to our minds throughout this time, God, would you begin to help us see them differently than we have before? Would you give us your perspective on who they are? Help us to remember that we are complicated too, so that in humility, we might respond with empathy to the people around us, that we might reflect love the way that you love us. Teach us how to hold our ground, to stay true to who we are, regardless of the way that people are acting around us. Amen. I want to invite you to go ahead and stand. We're going to sing one more song together that really paints a picture of what is true about every one of us and what is true about every person we will interact with throughout this week, including the most complicated ones. So take in these words as we sing.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Take a moment to follow our podcast on your preferred platform and be sure to download our app to stay informed on everything happening here at Crosspoint. And if you like what you heard today, don't hesitate to share it with a friend that might need to hear it too.